Hello everybody, I'm glad you're here today. Today is February 10th, 2025. In this video, we're going to talk about John chapter 21. If you want to crack out your Bibles, we're going to end up there after a while. I've got one kind of a prepping tip. It's kind of common sense, y'all, but it's something you might want to be thinking about now before the season is upon us, kind of thing. And I want to tell you some stories about what happened in our church service yesterday. Now, we're going to start with that because you're going to be encouraged by these stories, all right? So if you don't know my history, and I don't want to bog you down again if you've already been part of this channel and heard this before. I live in a little bitty country town in the panhandle of Texas, all right? And our little church, we sold our building for top dollar a couple of years ago and ended up closing our church because there were so many people that had gone, that had left, and it was just old people left. And I love them. Don't hear that I didn't love them. We all loved each other very much, but we all took a vote, unanimously decided, sold the building, let's just shut the doors and go to another church and go bless another group somewhere else in the area. So that's what we did 2 years ago, all right? So it was divine. It was the hand of God. It was a good, positive experience. No fighting, just love and Jesus. So that worked really well. Our family went to the community church here in our little town, and it's new. It's a new group of old citizens, not old people. It's young families, y'all. We have so many kids. At this point, we've got 3 new babies on the way in the next 8 months. So that's exciting. We have all kinds of people, all colors of people, all ages of people, and we're growing. Like, it's crazy what the Holy Spirit is doing, because it is absolutely, I've never experienced anything like it, and we are smack dab in the middle of it, loving it and letting the Spirit use us. It's fun. It's fun, y'all. And so, and it's not that institutional church, uh, if that makes sense when I say that. It's the idea of, if we're going to reach, and this is for smaller congregations or smaller towns, country towns are really, a lot of churches are struggling because it's just the old people left and they're all dying. And then what? I don't mean to, that's just really the reality of where I'm at. It may be different where you're at. If you're in the city, you may not understand this as well. But I visit with a lot of my friends, and they're like, that don't go to our church, to the community church, and they're like, oh yeah, it's just a matter of time before we shut our doors. We're just full of a bunch of old people. We're just punching the time clock. I'm like, I don't think that's the church Jesus wants us to be functioning in. I get it. It's where you're at. It's what, I don't necessarily think you're condemned to hell, or I don't think you're condemned to hell or anything like that. You're doing the best you can. I do believe that. But I mean, you got to want that, or you'd go find something different. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Anyway, I won't go into all the details because there's a lot more details I'm not giving you. I'm giving you the general story of how we switched over to this community church. Now, y'all know we had those Carillon bells that we got working. If you don't know what Carillon bells are, they're a technical bell. And we have a bell tower with speakers, and it's a system that's old, from the 90s. I think that's where it's from. I think it's from the 90s, mainly because Miss Linda of Bubby and Linda, her granddad is the one who bought those Carillons when he died. I mean, with his estate. Anyway, Miss Linda made sure I understood that was Granddaddy Estes bought those. Anyway, that's fine. I'm like, cool. I'm glad he did. Well, anyway, when we started going to church there, those bells were broken. They weren't working. And Mike and I, my husband, we got those bells to working, which required him climbing up into the bell tower. And anyway, that's been a whole story. But they're working now. They ring they play hymns, bell hymns, over our town at noon and at 6. And then when the time changes, is it going to be at 1 and 7, I think. Anyway, and then we ring them we actually have a real bell too, like a cast iron bell with a bell pull, like Notre Dame, the Hunchback of Notre Dame kind of thing. Anyway, it is a neat place. We have just recently torn down walls and made a gathering area with this beautiful brick electric fireplace. Y'all, we just did it. You know how long it's been since any church in our town has remodeled, updated anything? Oh, I don't know. And we know people at these different, there's only like two other churches. So we know what's going on at these other places. So anyway, we're growing. That's the point. We are growing, and it's young families, y'all, because we're chill about everything. You don't want to go to Bible class, sit in here and drink coffee and visit. And there'll be a time they'll grow into that. It's available when you're ready. I came from a church that if you're not in Bible class, you better find one. You better get off your butt and get in Bible class. If you're not, you can't sit out here and visit. I mean, that's kind of what I grew up with, and I don't like that anymore because I don't think that's where Jesus is at. But that's just me. So, and maybe it's you too. I'm sure if you've listened so far, it's probably you too, right? So anyway, yesterday, a couple of things happened. I teach the children. When we first started going there were no Bible classes. It was just worship service, which was fine. But our minister Larry, who is also an EMT, who also used to sell crop insurance, who used to, he's been around forever. He is a wonderful EMT and has kept the volunteer ambulance going in our town for decades. Anyway, Larry, he's like, man, we need to start Bible classes, and I was very burnt out uh, I was very burnt out in regards to teaching Bible class. I have taught. I have my degree in elementary education. I have taught in public schools. I have homeschooled my children for 32 years. So I savvy teaching, and I love it. I have a teacher's heart, but I was burnt out and I needed to sit still for a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, Larry's like, let me. He let me. He said, would you start a children's Bible class? And I was like, not only did I say no, I was like, hell no, Larry, I ain't going to do that. Leave me alone on that. And he was like, okay, it's cool. It's cool. Whatever the Lord does is what we're going to roll with. And like, sure. Well, it happened. The Lord moved me, softened my heart, and I thought, if we're going to have a Bible class, it cannot be like school at church. That's my opinion. So it has to be, because our people, I don't know if it's unique to our group or unique to the Gen Zers. I really don't know. But our young families the mamas and daddies are in their 20s now, okay? They do not get, they are not consistent. They're like, they just can't get there on time every Sunday. Some Sundays they're late. Some Sundays they can't be there. And so you have to have a flexible, as I observed all of this, we got to be flexible. So I thought we have to have a door always open, and we have to let whatever children are in there at the time, they can come in and hear about Jesus, and they can do other activities too. And so we have lots of things for them to play. We have activities for the older ones. And they just, I guess it would be like learning centers, but not that formal, y'all. So anyway, if that makes sense to anybody out there. So that's what I said. And the door always has to be open. And so when those mamas and daddies bring their kids by, they can stay. Mamas and daddies can stay in there. I mean, this day and age, I would never. I mean, I would. It would take a lot for me to leave my child with a stranger and have them shut the door behind me. I wouldn't do that. That's just me. I being very hypersensitive and hyper aware of what goes on in the world now. So that's why doors have to be open. Mamas and daddies can come in. Mamas and daddies can visit while they're in. They can drink coffee as long as they're quiet while we're talking about Jesus. And so anyway, I got the old flannel graphs, the old felts. They're Betty, Luke, and Felts. Remember, I did a video on that. And they are fabulous. Well, here's the story from yesterday after 10 minutes of just jabbering on. Yesterday, we had a class full of girls. Sometimes it's a class full of boys. Sometimes it's 12 kids from the ages of 1 all the way to 12. And they all know each other and they're all careful that we don't walk on the baby. Somebody's watching the baby. Anyway, usually the parents are in there. But anyway, yesterday it was a class full of little girls. Okay. And they love to help me put the felts on the felt board. So they build the story with me. And we're in Moses. Moses is an epic story. It goes on for weeks, if not months. All right. So we're just now, the children of Israel finally just got out of Egypt after the 10 plagues. So I was showing them about putting the blood on the doorpost and the Passover and the angel coming and passing over the doorways that had the blood. And one of the little girls who was telling me, after I tell the story, I say, now y'all tell it back to me and use the felts, so that they can internalize it and communicate it back and hopefully remember it that way. I hate worksheets. We don't do worksheets or I just don't like stuff like that. Anyway, so little Delilah, she says, well, she's talking about the death angel was coming and God's people, he gave them instructions and she said, and it was the blood that saved them. And I said, what did you say, Delilah? She said, it was the blood that saved them. And I said, I think God gave you those words this morning. Because I'll tell you something, and she's probably third grade. She has some uh, challenges. Okay, she has some vision, she has some blindness, and she also has some uh, other challenges. But she's a wonderful person. I love her. I said, I'm not sure that God didn't give you that this morning because that perfectly describes that God was teaching us a shadow of what was coming because whose blood saves us now? And they said, Jesus. And I was like, yes. And you see, we are being passed over by judgment when we are saved by Jesus's blood, just like the Israelites were passed over. So, anyway, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And so then we go into church and Larry has a good sermon. We're having a good time in church. We're worshiping Jesus and it's wonderful. For us, there were a lot of people. We had 51, y'all. And when we first started going there, the first Sunday, there were 12. Now there's 51. And it was babies were crying and kids were popping up and down, and we don't care if the kids sit still like that. All of that's gone. We're just glad they're there. We just love on each other. Well, Larry got to teaching, and he was talking about uh, one of the points he made was casting the nets. Like he was actually talking about the conversion of Simon. Before I go into this, I'm going to show you this. He was talking about the conversion of Simon Peter, that, go out a little further. And Simon was like, it doesn't matter because we've been fishing all night. We didn't catch nothing. And he said, go out further and cast your nets. And they did. And they could, nearly the boats were sinking. There were so many fish. So there's that story in the Bible. And later, after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection in John chapter 21, there's also another story about Jesus telling the apostles to cast their nets on the other side. Now, before we go into that story in John 21, I want to remind you of this, okay? Because you might want to get some of this for your house, for your prepping items. I don't know what you're into, but this has helped me a bunch, okay? And that is, and I just cut off a little, it's netting, it's net. I don't know if y'all can see this very well. This kind of netting, okay, I think it's called bird netting. If you get it on Amazon, you can get, this is like plastic, okay, and the squares are, I don't know, a half inch, something like that. You can get it with smaller squares or bigger squares, but you can get a big roll of this netting and you can throw it over your fruit trees to keep the birds off of it so you can harvest your fruit better. You can put it over your garden to keep the varmints out of your garden. I have tons of this over all of my chicken runs so that the owls won't get into it. And I'll tell you something, it keeps the critters out. That is true. Now sometimes I don't know how they've done it, but I walk out and there'll be a chicken on top of the net and I'm like, "How did you get out and how did you fly up there?" And I don't know. But they're always just so still waiting for me to come get them. My chickens are so trained. One day I walked out and all my chickens were at my back door. And I was like, "How did you get out? You're supposed to be in your run." But they were all just so happy. They were like, "Oh, look, it's Gina. She's here. Oh, hey, Gina's here." That's what it felt like. And I'm like, "Gang, come on." So I literally walked to their run. They followed me. I opened their door to their run, their little screen, and they walked into their run, okay? And the ones that didn't just allow it, they always just allow me. They never run. They always just allow me to pick them up and gently put them in. So, but this really keeps critters out and it keeps the chickens where they're supposed to be too, in theory. So, you might want to get you some of this netting just to have, just in case. You never know what you need it for. So, when I was thinking about the netting, Larry was talking about, go out deeper and cast your nets, and they caught all those fish. Well, Larry made the point. We need to let God tell us where to cast our nets in order to catch the most fish. Fish catch, whatever. And y'all, I like to fish. All right. I don't know if y'all like to, if you like to fish, comment below. I have a lot of fishing stories. I mean, you can literally, somebody in the boat will be catching all the fish and you can literally throw your hook out right beside theirs and won't catch a thing. And they're still catching. I don't know how that works, but it does. So I like to fish. I've been fishing a lot. Uh, but back then they just threw out nets. All right. So this is what I want to read in John chapter 21, and just I want us to remember that we need to allow God to show us where to cast nets, because even in our little church, in our community church, the Lord is showing us through dreams. Some of us are having dreams that we share with one another and discern and we pray about. Some of us are just common sense. Some doors are just opening, led by people who are just like, "I feel led to do this." And it opens up more doors. It's amazing. And we're letting people come with their talents and serve God. I grew up where the men led the singing, the men led the prayer, the men led the scripture, the men preached, and the men taught, and the women weren't allowed to speak at all. And the women, and I don't think that's what the verses in the Bible intended, although there has to always be, we need to submit to each other and never be militant. So I'm not going to go into women's role in the church, but what I'm saying is it's much more, the body breathes better when everyone's allowed to plug in with their own talent. So we have a young man, like I said, who, I've said this before, who has a dog who he comes to church with, so he's an introvert, and his dog is our guard dog. He walks through the church with the guard dog. We now have a crafting class of people, women, who are sewing different things. We're just fixing to set up sewing machines in there so that people can do that gift. We have the children's class. We have cooking, people who are cooking and taking food to people in need. It's just amazing. What are you good at? This. Okay, do it. We'll help you. So let's start in John, with this in mind, John chapter 21. Let's start with John chapter 20, verse 30. The disciples saw Jesus do many other miraculous signs in addition to the ones recorded in this book. So this is after his resurrection, okay? But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have life by the power of his name. So then there's kind of an epilogue here. It says, later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there: Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, two other disciples. Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing, which I find is so interesting, because don't we often revert back to what we were doing before we met Jesus? I mean, let's stay in our comfort zone. That's nearly what it feels like sometimes when hard things happen. And these people have been through some very mind-blowing days, all right? So Peter's like, I'm going fishing. We'll come too, they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, fellas, have you caught any fish? No, they replied. Then he said, throw out your net on the right side of the boat and you'll get some. So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved, said to Peter, it's the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to the shore. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from the shore. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. Bring some of the fish you've just caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were about 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. Now come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them with the bread and the fish. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. Okay, we're going to stop right there. Now, here's my thought. First of all, Jesus tells them where to catch the fish. If we will listen closely to Jesus, churches and individuals, Christians, he'll tell us what to do next. But you have to kind of sometimes be still for a little bit to hear his voice, all right? And sometimes you don't. Sometimes he's shouting at you. Also, I love the way Jesus serves in this story. He supplies them with everything they need, and he made sure the nets didn't tear. So wherever he tells you to throw the nets, we can trust him that he's going to keep it all together for us. Whatever adventure that might be. So, I hope this video helped you in some way, shape, or form. I hope I didn't just prattle on. Ask Jesus where to throw your net. All right? That's what I'm fixing to do every day. All right. Stay safe, America. From the pantry, this is Gina Lima Charlie. I'm out.